Bizarre Brain Comics. Whoa, 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 whoa there, Nightmare. Oh, hold on there, girl. Yeah. Oh, ha, 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 ha. Yeah. Oh, howdy, partners. Howdy, howdy. Yeah. I am the Trigger Kid. Yeehaw. Caps still don't work. And I'm here to tell you tales of the Wild West that never was. Yeah! Ha ha ha! Yeah. Okay. Well. We're going to talk about today. Yeah, this is Trigger Kid for Bizarre Brain Comics, where I like to talk about comics, kind of break down the art, stories, a little bit of the history of the creators. Now, this time I'm going to talk about this little book right here. This is from DC Comics, number 114, Tomahawk. Tomahawk 114. And it's also got it's Tomahawk and his rip-roaring Raiders. DC Comics 1968. Yep, 1968. Let's take a... Oh, gotta get a little drink here, my tea. I know that's not very cowboyish. But, you see, this isn't exactly a Western. It's classified as a Western, but it's not a Western in the classic sense. Since this Tomahawk takes place during the American Revolution, 1770s. Okay, now here we go. Tomahawk from DC Comics, created by Joe Samachson, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, and Edmund Good. And he first appeared in Star Spangled Comics in 1947. So he started in the Golden Age. But what we're talking about here is later in the Silver Age. He was originally a backup feature in that book, that's Star Spangled Comics, and in World's Finest. And not really a true Western because it was set during the American Revolution, as I said, where he was a scout. That is, like Daniel Boone, coonskin cap, flintlock rifle, buckskins. And he was assisted by a teenage boy, Dan Hunter. And later, he commanded the Rip-Roaring Rangers, also known as Tomahawk's Rangers, which made it a bit more like a war book, because this was a very diverse cast of characters. Okay, and that latter change may have been due in part to a popular movie and TV show of Northwest Passage, which featured the exploits of the historical Rogers Rangers, which was the progenitor of all American Special Forces teams. Most of the stories were produced by writer France Herron and artist Fred Ray. So I will just presume that they are the creators on this particular book because they're not credited. And their Silver Age stories, earlier in the Silver Age, like the 50s and earlier 60s, they tended to be over the top and silly with like dinosaurs and cavemen, etc. Stuff like that. So, yeehaw! Let's go have a little look-see at Tomahawk and his Rip-Roaring Rangers. Yeah. Tomahawk and his rip-roaring Rangers. And here is the terrible power of Chief Iron Hands. And that's very, very dramatic, that cover. I don't know who drew the cover. I will just presume. It doesn't even look like it, except for maybe the inking. So I don't know. Could be that Ray fella. And here, of course, it shows this Indian chief with iron hands as a giant smashing the tree and stuff. Now, as I said, this is kind of later, and the stories weren't quite as silly. They were getting more realistic. Now, earlier on, you had stuff like this. This savage caveman. There's his rangers there, and he's flying a pterosaur. Or here in the lost land of Paleface tribe of white Indians, and they're beset by some kind of weird dinosaur. And then there's this one here, the secret of the Indian sorceress, and some kind of monster there, which I will tell you, the monster turns out to be fake, but they're not fake in these others. And then a little later, you had other creators working on it. Had great covers here by Neil Adams, and a bit more standard and not so silly. Is action adventure set in the time of the American Revolution, with various opponents, some Indians, some of the redcoats, and stuff like this too. This one is not Neil Adams, but just as dramatic and dynamic type of cover. Now here, Chief Ironhead. Look, whoever originally had this book, because it had stamped his name on it, Brett Howard. So if you're out there somewhere, like I said, 1968. Look at that ad for the models for the space program, and that's an earlier version of the lunar module too. Okay, Tomahawk, the terrible power of Chief Iron Hands. Now this artist, now I don't really know who it is. I think I said, now I've forgotten the name that I mentioned a bit ago, but we'll just go with that. He's a good draftsman, kind of cartoonish, and not as illustrative as someone like Neil Adams, or the artist who, this particular one is like Frank Thorne and Joe Kubert. Their two styles work together. Here is Frank Thorne doing both the penciling and the inking. I'll talk about Frank Thorne later, but it's much more realistic, even though his style is very organic. This older artist here, his style is organic as well, but not, in my opinion, not quite as favorable, just in my eyes. But it is more old-fashioned, quite adequate, good, very good storytelling. And like I said, the story is not as silly, but it is some silly. Okay, that was just the splash page. Here we go. Tomahawk and his Rangers in the northeast woods somewhere during the war, and they got a bunch of lumberjacks cutting down trees, and his Rangers are escorting the logs down river, where they're going to be used to build a fort. So here they are, just talking. They're carrying these big old casts. Those are casts of powder, and they'll show that why later. And they're complaining how hot and muggy it is, which is understandable. It's in the summer, and they're just sweating up a storm. And then here they come across a log jam, which happens sometimes when your logs are going down a river, and so they're setting powder charges to clear the log jam, and then come across these Indians. Well, one of the guys, big anvil, he spots the deer, and he decides he's going to go get him some fresh meat. Meanwhile, this Indian chief, who happens to be a very large man, even bigger than Big Anvil, and Big Anvil ain't no small small dude, I'll tell you. He's going after the deer too. So they strike at the deer at the same time, and then they conflict over whose it was. Upon examination, Big Anvil admits there's no bullet hole, so said, okay, you can take the deer. But Big Anvil's not too happy about it because they come close to blows. And then there's the Indian chief on it in his canoe a few minutes later. Excuse me, my nose is bothering me. Oh, okay, here we go again. Okay, there's the Indian chief going down the river in a canoe with the deer, and they're setting the charges. Unbeknownst, of course, this Indian chief doesn't know about the charges, and he's approaching that log jam. They don't know that he's approaching. They set the charges, scatter, and kablooey! And he's right in the midst of that kablooey with the log jam. Okay, that's a pretty... Because look at this. It's a very good representation. I mean, good storytelling, visual storytelling. You can see just exactly what's going on and the thoughts of everybody that's going on. And there he is, caught almost in the middle of that explosion. That's a pretty decent explosion. And here's where it gets exciting and dramatic. So, right in the midst, he's swept away by the remnants of that log jam, and in the process, he is injured. His hands are crushed, and he blames them because he thought they did it on purpose. Specifically, so he is very angry, and he intends to killing them. But his hands are crushed. His hands are useless, and they're about to have a conflict there with some redcoats. Who come across a small group of redcoats, and they have a little skirmish. And yeah, there it gives you a good example just how big Anvil is, picking up one of those redcoats in each hand and tossing them around like 10 pins. Yeah. Okay. And picks up a log. Okay, that's unrealistic, but it's comics. It looks good. Picks up that log and just smacks the heck out of him. And the redcoats wind up getting away. But then they meet the Indians, and they think, oh, see this panel too. Those faces are kind of goofy, very cartoonish looking. And they make friends because they have a common enemy in Tomahawk and his Rangers. And they used to do this back then. Sometimes have half a page of story, and then some house ads. Usually house ads. Sometimes other stuff, but usually half house ads. And they continue. And this the commander of those guys, of those redcoats, he comes up with an idea. He gets a blacksmith to make some huge iron gloves. Because this part really makes no sense because his hands are crushed, so they're useless. So they basically make these huge iron gloves that he's able to move, but protect his hands. But of course, just overlook it. Of course, it's just quickly. And that would have the design and construction of that probably would have taken weeks. But we're talking comic books here. But so he changes his name because we never knew his name beforehand. He was just a chief. Now we know him. He goes by the name of Chief Iron Hands, and he starts smashing stuff. Yeah, okay. And his hands are fine in those things because he can still move them fine. So here the Rangers are taking a dip in the cool water because of the heat, and Chief Iron Hands kind of jumps him. And Big Anvil says he's going to take him, and he just doesn't stand a chance. Even without those gloves, those iron hands, he wouldn't stand a chance because this guy's so big and strong. As you can see right here, just picks Big Anvil up and tosses him around like he's nothing, just like he was doing those redcoats earlier. And injures his arm. And that's they hold him off and avoid bloodshed. Kind of send him packing. Meanwhile, they're still going downriver, escorting the logs, and they see this storm coming up. And here we have. Looks like they're being bushwhacked. There's an arrow being shot, but it's just a warning arrow because he didn't intend to hit anybody. But said if they don't stop and face him, the arrows will get him. So he basically got the drop on him. Okay, this is nice. I mean, he did good with the figures, good with the drama, good with the action. I'm not thrilled with his style of inking. It's very kind of cartoonish, but it's organic, which really fits his stuff. Like I say, when I say organic, I mean stuff kind of like over here. His style is very organic, but his draftsmanship is superior. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this man's draftsmanship at all. So Tomahawk says he'll take him on because he sees that storm coming. He's got an idea. Well, so here, this is the inspiration for that cover, and he smacks. It's basically a sapling because Tomahawk dodges. Gotta admit, this cover is much more dramatic. And I like this cover. It's a good cover. I just wish he had drawn this panel a bit more like that. So he backs up to another tree, a big, big tree. And as the storm breaks and lightning strikes the tree, and close proximity plus his iron hands, and he gets zapped by the lightning and stuns him. Here's the rain coming down, and the other Indians have run off, and here they take Iron Hands to a nearby abandoned mine shaft where they're out of the weather, and they proceed to render assistance and save his life, and convince him that they're not really enemies, that it was an accident, because he is thankful that they saved him, and they couldn't understand why. And then they're being besieged here by the Redcoats. And they send down a lit keg of powder down the shaft. And this is when Iron Hands, he sees that the Redcoats are deceiving him because they don't care about him. They just wanted him to take out Tomahawk. And so he helps them. There's another big kablooey. And the cave's about to cave in. But this is... And they've got some of the other Indian hostages. Tomahawk comes out, and look... This is where he gets his name, from his skill with the tomahawk, even though his name is actually Thomas Hawk. And tosses that. That's a pretty good representation of tossing that tomahawk, which cuts the fuse on the powder keg, foiling them. Meanwhile, inside, Iron Hands is holding up the ceiling of this cave and cleaning the clock of all these redcoats. So is Big Anvil. So they're working together. And they get outside and they realize that Iron Hands is still inside holding it up. So he rushes in, and shores up. And this is a good panel, good representation. I'd like to have seen this one larger myself, because it would make it more spectacular, more dynamic. But this is fine. I think it's a well-drawn, well-represented panel. And shores it up, and they become fast friends, and they'll be allies. And they wave goodbye as the Rangers leave, and there's Chief Iron Hands to go back home. And here's another house head. It's followed up with another story. What they usually did then, with these, on the newer story, they would write a newer main story, and then have a reprint backup story from when, which was probably originally published as one of the backup stories from Star Spangled Comics or World's Finest. It's fun. It's a good, fun story. Good for kids. Like I said, this is light in that area where it's a little silly, but not as silly as like these stories. They're thoroughly enjoyable. You just want to kind of laugh. Very campy. Where's that? I can't find the dinosaur story. I know it's here. There we go. Kind of silly. Pure fun. And this is without the Rangers. This must be an older one with but here you see these white Indians, and she looks like she just came from Sweden. With this fictitious looking dinosaur. It's silly, it's fun at this time, because at this time DC Comics knew that if they put apes, dinosaurs, cavemen, anything like that on the cover, it sold better. So they come up with a lot of these silly stories. That's why they did the same thing with the war with in the war comics. Monster Island, when they had all the dinosaurs during the war, and they're fighting dinosaurs. I've forgotten the title of it. And they had big apes. So they had all these stories with apes of various sizes. They even I don't have it here. I don't know where it is. I've got one, or had one, with Tomahawk fighting a giant ape and actually befriending. And then they even had a sequel story to that one, which was a lot of fun. But these are more skilled. And then the last few issues, it was changed, because this ran from 1950 through 1972, and the last few issues, it was changed from Tomahawk to Hawk, son of Tomahawk. That to put it more in line with a standard Western, so it's probably set in the 1830s or so. It's a little closer. And that's all. It's just a good fun read. I could recommend it if you like this kind of stuff. I really like this colonial period stuff. Like I mentioned, the Northwest Passage. I love the movie. I love the TV show. If the book were not so intimidating that is based on, I would really like to read that. But that book is like 600 or 700 pages long, and I'm a slow reader. But it's a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed that. And like it if you did. Share it with other comic book people that you may know. And remember, comics are art.